Hello, coming to you from the chilly confines of the basement of the carpet shop. This is the Gallimaufry. Thank you for joining us for another delve into the hodgepodge annals of history. My name is Will, and I am joined today, as ever, by the lovely Nick. How are you, Nick?
I'm fantastic, thank you. It's great. Always great to get the band back together again.
It is. It's good, isn't it? How are you enjoying your return to the basement?
With the usual excitement and trepidation.
I can see you're very excited.
I'm going bananas.
You're going bananas?
Yeah.
Yes. So we came down the old apples and pears.
For the lovely audience we've cultivated.
Yes, the lovely audience we've cultivated. Our lovely audience of fruits.
That's a very specific, topic we're going to talk about today. Is the fruits we find in our fruit bowl. And a little bit about the fruit bowl itself. It's actually one of those weird areas of history where no one's really looked at the fruit bowl and done like a sort of encyclopedic history of the fruit bowl across society and cultures, because it's just something that is ubiquitous to many different regions.
Yeah, the fruit bowl is sort of, it's one of those sort of mundane things which have just become accepted as part of domestic life. It feels like it's sort of always been there. And it just sits there, doesn't it? But then,
Did you actually eat any fruit, or did you just buy the fruit so it looks nice?
How much orange is there in a can of Fanta?
Is that what your fruit bowl's filled with? It's just filled with Fanta.
Yeah, just Fanta. I mean,
so you've got the lemon one occasionally.
Yeah, and then the orange and the fruit twist, and
the fruit twist is very nice. Yeah.
What fruit is being twisted? I don't know. It doesn't taste like any fruit I've tasted, but it's
best not to ask.
Best not to ask. No,
don't ask, don't tell.
But the fruit bowl, it's sort of it's something we're all familiar with. It's something which just sort of blends into the background, but it has been part of our lives, whether we realise it or not.
It's been a staple of society for millennia, and of course, Renaissance paintings wouldn't be half the brilliant things they are without a bit of fruit in them.
It has, yeah.
I mean, it started out as a fruit basket, which then became a fruit bowl.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, you've summed it up really there, haven't you? We could probably stop recording now.
Yes, it's been a very fruitful discussion. These aren't going to stop, by the way. They're going to go all the way on through this.
I think maybe we should be cherry picking our facts here.
Oh,
with that, why don't you let your pair of hosts guide you through the world of fruit?
That was quite good, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very good.
Cool. Okay, well, maybe what we should do is ask the burning question that everyone's asking. What is fruit?
The word itself, I think, is important to address. The word itself is Latin, and it means to enjoy or take pleasure in, which I'm sure many school children don't actually agree with when they first get given fruit for lunch.
No.
A fruit is something that develops from the flower of a plant, while the other parts of the plant may be categorized as something else, like vegetables or whatever. It's this bit that we call the fruit specifically. So fruits contain seeds. That's a universal thing. While vegetables can consist of roots, stems, and leaves. However, different sort of classifications, as I mentioned, have arisen. So while, and this may shock a lot of people, the tomato is a fruit. Yes. Fruits are generally considered to be sweet, and the tomato is obviously a bit more savoury. So they're actually, from a culinary perspective, classed as a vegetable. And in fact, in 1893, the US Supreme Court actually ruled that tomatoes should be classified as a vegetable, much to the disappointment of botanists.
Right.
We can actually play a game. I've actually devised a very quick mini-game for this. Right, it's time to play a game of Have I Got Fruit for You?
Ah, okay.
Yes. No copyright infringement intended for a popular BBC panel show.
No.
Let's start with an easy one, because we just talked about it. Is it a fruit or vegetable? The tomato.
Well, are we in America?
No, we're not.
No. Oh, it's a fruit then.
Perfect. Brilliant. Correct. The potato.
The potato. That's a vegetable, isn't it? There's no seeds in
Correct. 2 out of 2 so far.
Yeah.
The cucumber.
Oh, that has got seeds in it, but it feels wrong. But it's a fruit, isn't it?
It is a fruit. Yes.
Yes.
The courgette.
Now that's just a grown-up cucumber, isn't it?
Different.
Has it got seeds in it? Yeah, it does. Yeah, fruit.
Damn it, you're actually better than this than I thought.
You gave it away with the seed thing.
I did. Well, bananas don't have seeds, but as we'll find out, there's a very good reason for that. Peas. Peas.
Peas. Is there a seed inside a pea?
Or is the pea a seed?
Is the pea the seed? I'm going to say it's a vegetable.
Actually, it was a trick question because it's neither a vegetable or a fruit.
Is it a cheese?
It's a legume.
It's a legume. Oh.
The pea pod itself is a fruit, but the pea itself is not.
Okay.
As we were talking about, like there are vegetable plants which have fruits.
Yeah.
So it's all complicated. It's all tricky.
Does this mean that, I mean, the baked beans, does that count as no, because the tomato is a fruit, isn't it? So baked beans is there's no vegetable in a tin of baked beans.
That is absolutely accurate, yeah.
But you would treat it like a... Actually, you wouldn't treat it like a vegetable, would you? You'd treat it like a sort of sauce.
Because beans are, you are right, they are a legume, as are lentils.
Oh, it's all very confusing, isn't it?
Yes.
So I can't be adding baked beans to my fruit bowl either. No, I can. That's fine, because of the tomato. I can put the tomato sauce in, but pick out the beans.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad we sorted that.
Never going into your kitchen again. Tomato-covered banana.
So we've talked about what fruit is. Hopefully, we're all on board now. Even though the definition of fruit is confusing, depending on who you ask. But how?
I'm glad we cleared that up.
I'm glad we did. I'm going to have to rearrange my fruit bowl when I go home. This isn't going to work. I'm going to have to.
Well, what you need is a fruit bowl, a vegetable bowl, a legume bowl.
Yeah.
And then you could even subclassify everything as well. You could take out the berries, what are technically berries and what aren't berries.
Yeah, because some berries are drupes, aren't they?
Yeah. Some berries which have berry in the name aren't berries.
Yeah.
It's very confusing.
It is very confusing. Yes. But, yes, so that's what fruits are. But how are fruits cultivated? How do we produce fruits as we know them? So nature has been producing fruits long before humans turned up. However, much like how the fearsome wolf was turned into the distinctly less intimidating Pomeranian, fruit has also been manipulated over the years to suit our needs.
It's not just manipulate. Everyone today complains about genetically modified foods. And I'm not using this as a justification that we should all go out and buy GM foods, but everything we eat today is incredibly drastically different to how fruit actually was in its original form.
Yes.
In fact, it's as you say, like with dogs, we've been messing with fruits and vegetables and everything for millennia, to their benefit and their detriment.
It's the interesting about are you familiar with the paleo diet?
No,
it was a bit of a fad a few years ago, but the idea was that the healthiest, most natural way for a human to basically feed themselves would be to eat like our Paleolithic ancestors. So it promoted eating mainly a fruit and vegetable based diet. Problem was, you try finding a fruit today which would have been eaten by our Paleolithic ancestors, and you're going to be quite sort of short on choices.
Also, didn't they eat a lot of meat?
They did eat a lot of meat. So I'm not sure whether meat came into it.
Their stomachs would have been vastly different and be able to tolerate a lot more than what we do today.
They would have been. Also, the idea of a Paleolithic person eating a blueberry is kind of ludicrous. When you consider a blueberry is what, 100, 150 years old?
I did not know that. I didn't know it was 150 years old.
Yeah.
Is that or is it? So basically, cultivation, we've been doing it for years. It's a very simple technique. It usually involves just growing trees next to each other and making sure the seeds cross-pollinate. You can graft a bit of a branch onto another tree to sort of create something. And we do this with every single fruit. And that's how we get the fruits we have today. Because original fruits, no matter what they are, apples, bananas, pears, as you said, they all look different to each other. And they're all actually not that nice. They're quite sour.
Yeah.
They're really quite sour and they're not that appetizing.
It's sort of naive, really, to think that nature would just hand us just all these fruits which are just coincidentally ideal for humans and that we generally quite enjoy eating and, provide the nutrition we need.
Since the beginning of mankind, fruit has kind of been side by side with us. And we've been growing it, we've been developing it, we've been changing it as we go through the ages. It's kind of funny because there's not a culture on earth that hasn't had a fruit of its choice, and we've all got different fruits compared to the standard ones we all know today. So different regions would eat a lot more of different things. Of course, we all know the story of Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit.
Yes.
Which many people say is an apple, but it's not an apple. It was in the Bible. It's just called a fruit, and no one really knows what it is. But it could well have been figs because they were wearing fig leaves to cover their genitalia. But no one ever put that connection together for some reason.
Do you know the thing about figs and a certain percentage of them containing the remnants of dead wasps?
Lovely, bit more protein, always good. Why?
It's just there's a certain type of wasp, and part of its life cycle is it crawls inside a fig to lay its eggs. But then once it's laid its eggs, it dies. So the fig just sort of absorbs its body.
But one question arises from, if fruits today are now a lot different from what they originally were, why did we initially start eating them in the first place? And the answer to that is very simple. It's because even though they might not have tasted very nice, a bit sour, a bit bitter, they didn't immediately make you violently ill.
That is always a bonus.
Yeah, it's very much a bonus when you're out in nature. I mean, there's a lot of berries today that you can eat and you'd just be sick.
I mean, when it's my turn to do the cooking, I consider it a compliment when my guests aren't immediately violently ill. We'd call that success.
I don't come round for dinner on quite a frequent basis.
But so the first fruits to be domesticated are thought to be from the ancient Mediterranean, and this was roughly 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. And we believe these first few domesticated fruits included the fig, the date, the olive, and the grape, which are all fruits we still have today. It's also thought that citrus fruits, bananas, apples, and apricots were also cultivated in Central and East Asia not long after, before being brought to the West by traders.
Well, that's it. As we've cultivated fruit, they have been spread by different cultures. Because a lot of the fruit we associate, maybe even with countries today, like if you ask people, "What is a very English fruit?" and they'll go like an apple or a pear. Like they're not native to the UK.
No,
they were. The apple, as we'll discover when we look at fruit by fruit. Well, what a treat you're in for. They're all from very different places of the world. And in fact, a bit like coffee, how everyone thought, oh, coffee, that's from South America, right? Brought over. A lot of fruits that we think of as being American these days are South American, brought over. And a lot of fruits we don't think of being as South American are South American. Because when they were trying to sell them, they tried to distance that from the markets they were selling them into.
So is there... is there a fruit that's native to Britain? Would it be something like, you feel like the elderberry or the blackcurrant or something would be? But
in terms of native fruits to Britain, it's because obviously humans have traipsed around and brought with them seeds and stuff everywhere. It's difficult to pin down exactly what's native, but it mostly berries. Your blackberries, your cranberries, strawberries, raspberries, currants, things that we would consider easily spottable out while foraging in the countryside.
Well, that makes sense. If you go out, you can see, there are a lot of wild berries in the countryside in the UK. Not many wild, pumpkins or pineapples. But
it's interesting to look at different civilizations and what they ate around different times. So when we get this obviously from literature, but for instance, Persephone, the Greek god of vegetation and springtime, was tricked into partial life in the underworld. I don't know what partial life means, but partially in the underworld.
Like a holiday home.
Yeah, after tasting a pomegranate. But fruit itself is often seen as like a symbol of fertility because of its natural life cycle. Like it's lush and it's beautiful and it's fast growing and it withers and it dies. Hence why it was obviously used in a lot of Renaissance paintings to symbolize life and decay and all of that jazz. In Egypt, they ate fruit, melons, dates, figs. As we mentioned, figs were sort of common around that Mediterranean sort of African belt. The Greeks ate raisins, apricots, figs, apples, pears, pomegranates as well. The Aztecs ate tomatoes, avocados, peppers, which are also a fruit, pumpkins, squashes, which aren't. But, everyone has their own regional sort of fruits. So aren't you glad Britain was invaded countless times so all these lovely people like the Romans could bring over things like apples and pears?
Yes, yeah. That's, I suppose, otherwise we'd all be eating lingonberries or something.
If you sat outside foraging.
Yeah.
Instead of a Tesco meal deal, it'd just be berries.
Just berries.
Yeah.
Yeah, though there are some fruits which were able to appear without human intervention, without any cultivation, which just happened to be ready to go from nature. These include the cactus fruit, the durian, and the previously mentioned lingonberries.
All pretty shit fruits.
They're not the best
being
fruits.
honest.
Are they? I mean, durian is apparently really good if you're from Southeast Asia, but it hasn't really caught on anywhere else, I don't think.
So yes, we have a huge, long history of humans cultivating fruit, making it, toying around with it, manufacturing it, and then sort of distributing it. But where does fruit sort of sit in society? Because we always think of fruit as being that sort of, it's nature's bounty, it's the great leveler, everyone can enjoy it. But that's strictly not necessarily true, because, as we've said, fruits started out as quite unpalatable things, and we've made them palatable. And obviously that takes effort and time. And who has effort and time? The wealthy. So you have centuries of meddling with fruit by the aristocracy and by the more prominent members of society, who decided that, A, they had spare time and hobby enough to do this, and it was also just fashionable. You know, gradually over the centuries, fruit became a sort of status symbol in some ways, which is funny because initially, thanks to, at least in Western culture, the idea of the four humours and medicine, raw fruit was actually considered quite a bad thing for some period of time.
Oh, it was bad for you humans. Or it caused an imbalance, did it?
Exactly, yeah. So while fruits were very popular, with this, I mean, the poor would eat anything if they could. So a lot of people ate fruit where they could if they could get their hands on it. But a lot of other people put them into pies, they baked them, they use them in lots of different recipes, which is why you get all these sorts of weird pies. Like at least in the UK, we eat a lot of strange fruit pies, or we have spiced pears, or we have things that are pickled or sugary, or just we do a lot of things to take them as far away from the raw state as possible.
Yes, we're big into jams.
That's it, jams.
Or,
I couldn't think of jams. I was trying to think, what do we do with... You're right.
Sloe gin.
We love a bit of sloe gin.
It's a good way of using a completely inedible fruit.
Just to clarify what the four humours were. So medicine, people believed in this theory of the four humours, which comes from the Greeks. It's always the Greeks, isn't it? The four humours were basically your liquids. So blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And these were connected with the seasons of the year. So, yellow bile with summer, black bile with autumn, phlegm with winter, and blood with spring.
This sounds like I don't know, anatomy horoscopes or something.
Yeah, essentially. And alongside this idea that foods had to be cold, wet, hot, and dry and line up with the seasons.
Right.
And you needed a place for all of them. And raw fruit was seen as often quite cold. So more than often, people avoided it, including poor people, but also because it was quite expensive.
Right.
And then sugar comes along and revolutionises everything. And it becomes a common combination to take these sort of cold, sour fruits and put them with sugar. And put them into pies.
But it also has the useful side effect of preserving when you combine something with lots of sugar. So you can take some fruit in the summer or the autumn. You can boil it down with some sugar and you've got jam all winter.
Exactly. It's just funny, though, because you look at, say, back then in Western culture, a lot of people were just avoiding this very nutritious source of food, raw food, because some Greek physician named Galen decided to say, oh, yeah, gives you diarrhea and is unhealthy for you because it's too cold because of your phlegm.
So was it the issue was that it was a cold, wet food then, was it? And you had to have hot, dry food? Or
it depends on the season, but they were just seen as cold. And often because fruit flowers at the end of the summer, which also tended to coincide with a lot of illness.
Right.
The ending of summer and the start of autumn and winter, people tended to associate, fruit must be causing this, cause and effect, basically. Because everyone's getting ill, ergo it must be the fruit that's just been ripened and flowered, etc. So it's a combination of different things. But, it didn't stop people eating fruit in its raw form, but at least in Western Europe, it was mainly a sort of stick it in a dish.
Right, and that was okay.
Yeah.
That nullified the coldness of it. I guess if you make a crumble out of an apple, then it's not cold anymore.
No. It's delicious crumble.
It is delicious crumble. Clever.
And just going back to the idea of cultivation, and I guess the forerunners of the cultivation industry today were those elite people, were those aristocrats. before the 17th and the 16th and 17th century, you had ornamental pleasure gardens which were situated on monastic or royal lands, and they were exclusively for growing fruit. And then this gradually began to progress to the upper and gradually down to the middle classes by the 17th and 18th century, who had these massive homes and gardens and decided, we should probably make use of this space, which led to the growing of fruits and plants, particularly exotic fruits, because the more exotic fruit you had, the more status you had. And they did this through a variety of ways, but one of the most unique methods was something called a wall garden. I don't know if you know what a wall garden is.
A wall garden?
Yes.
No.
These are actually very popular in Scotland, because obviously Scotland is a lovely place,
Yes.
but it's a bit miserable sometimes, and very, very cold and wet. And basically, a wall was a specially constructed wall at a certain angle and position in the garden, which allowed plants shelter from wind and gave, because of their position, were perfectly timed for when the sun had risen in the day, to allow the wall to absorb heat. And therefore, you sort of create a temperature enclosure, a mini sort of bubble or a greenhouse in a way, around these walls, which allowed people to plant trees and shrubs. But they were very expensive and time-consuming, and you had to build a lot of them, and not all of them were successful. So it wasn't like it was a mass industry. There were mass industries in Europe based around this concept. The Palace of Versailles, for instance, had a massive one. There's a spectacular example in Montreal, in Paris as well, where peaches were grown on a massive scale using these walled systems. In fact, they had, it's quite interesting actually, because they had more than 600 kilometers in the 1870s of these fruit walls. When the industry reached its peak, just before the idea of plate glass came along and ruined it, and everyone built greenhouses. And they had a 300-hectare maze of walls, which was so confusing that when the Prussian army invaded during the siege of Paris in 1870, they just went around it because they couldn't figure it out. And essentially, these walls were they could be different materials, but the most common one was half-meter thick limestone. And mats could be pulled down to insulate fruits around the walls on cold nights. By about the 1800s, Belgium and Dutch cultivators started experimenting with using glass and building glass walls, and putting the glass sort of against the wall, sort of making a sort of triangular nook. And then from there, when you get the development of plate glass, you get greenhouses built, and this, as I said, replaced the walls, and people started building these massive, massive greenhouses. And in fact, one of the most impressive one is these, I'm never going to pronounce it properly, is the Limonea de Castile, which is a very, very famous citrus museum now. Yes. But it was built by the Medicis to cultivate citrus fruit, because citrus fruit was a major passion of theirs. And so you've got all these different varieties in this massive garden. Obviously, by this time, the four humours had sort of fallen out of favour, and gradually we were starting to understand the human body better. About bloody time. Orchards, fruit farms began to dominate urban areas, and fresh fruit became popular amongst people because actually people worked out, actually, it's all right for you.
Right. That's good then.
And as we said, the aristocrats who used to outdo each other by growing pineapples or figs now filtered down to the middle class, who were like, hey, look at my fig row or my grapes or my peaches. This popularity of fruit actually had a disastrous impact on fruit, one could argue. Because fruit has thousands and thousands of species in it. Different, there are thousands of actual species of bananas or fruit, or apples or pears or citrus fruit. But we and most of the world only eat one very narrow sort of species of each. We have managed to sort of take the fun out of fruit because, we've bred these specific flavors which we've become accustomed to. And so by the 1950s, refrigeration had come along and invented it and made this much, much worse, because suddenly now you had one narrow strain that you could then transport across the world at no problem and sell it.
Some kinds of fruit, which we might cover later, can actually only be reproduced by cloning the original plant, which means that any defects that plant had or any weaknesses to certain pests would be passed on to every other plant in that cultivation, which is how you can have sort of one new plant disease just kind of wipe out an entire crop because they're all just clones of each other.
There was lots of museums around in the sort of 1890s century who would showcase interesting vegetables and fruits that people could come and view. And there was one in Italy. So there's this guy called Burdin in 1853. He ran one of these successful greenhouses in Turin, and he commissioned Garnier Velletti, who was this sort of modeler and sculptor, to create an exhaustive inventory of all the fruits and vegetables he had in his collection, which is basically he used a process of using alabaster powder, wax, resin to create a mold and cast around the fruit, and then they paint them to reflect real life, and they're these beautiful little wax models. So you think about how many times he had to do that. By the time he finished his collection, the museum had gone out of business. So,
Okay.
But it's invaluable for botanists because they're looking at the species of, say, apple and oranges we have today and comparing that to these wax models, which showcase all these different varieties of colour, of shape, size, texture, and we just don't have that anymore. We can buy like maybe 2 or 3 of the varieties in the supermarkets across the world today that the Velletti was making molds of, and that was only 200 years ago or more.
Yeah. Now, is this sort of caused by the industrialization of fruit, how it has become a commodity that is sort of grown en masse and sold, rather than something that you would just, you would grow locally? So, say with the banana, we've all kind of agreed we like that particular banana. Why grow anything else? If everyone is happy to have this one that we already have and we've already invested in.
And it's funny because that particular banana is called the Cavendish, which is named after the Duke of Devonshire.
The Duke of Devonshire.
William Cavendish.
Right.
Who basically cultivated this banana. He received a shipment of bananas from Mauritius and decided he liked the flavour of them.
Yeah.
And began to grow them in his garden.
Right.
And they cultivated it, made them a little bit sweeter. And that's the banana we have today. And that was created in 1830. Or 1834, to be precise.
Right. So the banana as we know it is no more than 200 years old then?
Yes, but it actually replaced a different banana, which I think you do know the name of because it's a very funny name.
Is this the Gros Michel?
Yes. Oui, oui. The Gros Michel.
Big Michael.
Big Michael, yes.
Big Michael. Now, I think more fruits should have varieties like Big Michael.
Yes, but sadly, Big Michael is now dead Michael.
Yeah, so there's interesting fact. The Big Michael, or the Gros Michel, as we should probably call it, used to be the dominant banana in the world. And as we said, bananas are basically reproduced through cloning, which meant that when a new disease appeared, it just wiped out the whole crop. So we fell back to the old Cavendish, which had a much less interesting name. But it means that when you have a banana-flavoured sweet these days, it doesn't really taste that much like what we think of a banana tasting like. And it's because the artificial flavours were developed back when the dominant banana was the Gros Michel, and it was based on the flavour of that banana that we don't really have so much anymore now. And that's why there's that disconnect between the flavour of a banana and the flavour of your foam banana that you might buy at the sweet shop.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's funny because the Gros Michael was actually, I think, historically, it came along a couple of years after. I think it came around in 1836. There was a French-Jamaican botanist named Jean-François Peugeot. Not like the car.
Not like the car.
And he found one of the bananas on the plantation he was working on was growing yellow rather than green or red, like the colour of it, and then tasted it and noticed it was sweet, and decided to grow it. Yeah. And it's apparently it's a very thick, creamy tasting banana, like very sweet, not like the Cavendish, which is by comparison by everyone who had tasted a Gros Michael, and there are not many left because it literally died out in the 50s. So our beloved Queen would have had quite a few Gros Michaels.
She would have done.
And then had to settle for a Cavendish.
Our parents may have even had a few.
Well, it's sort of, I think it's 1952, near her coronation time, actually, funny enough. It's completely, the market dropped out because of this thing called Panama fungus.
There are actually recent attempts to bring back the Gros Michel. Some strains of it have managed to survive in very isolated areas where the fungus hasn't reached to it. And there are attempts afoot to kind of genetically engineer this banana to give it that resistance to this fungus, and then make it a mainstream banana again. So if you're very savvy, you can actually track down one of these surviving Gros Michel bananas, and it is apparently quite a different experience to having a modern-day Cavendish.
For the last decade or two, we are now fearing that the Cavendish might go out because of the same fungus having mutated and gone, I've polished off the Michael, I fancy a Cavendish now.
So we've essentially made the same mistake twice.
We have.
Yeah.
And what's worrying is we're doing it with a large number of fruits as well. We are cloning fruits which are all genetically the same, and when the one gets ill, they can all get ill.
Yeah.
And it's a terrifying thing. Of course, the banana itself comes from the plantain, genetic relative of that, which has seeds in it. If you look at a plantain, it looks very different to a banana because it has these sort of ring of seeds in it.
Yeah, and the plantain is still a common fruit in parts of Africa and the West Indies.
And South America. Love it in South America.
Yeah. So one of the major challenges with fruit, that is after the absolute ball ache of growing the thing in the first place, is how to store and transport it. So most fruit are inherently soft and quite quick to perish. So it's important that they are kept viable between the farm and the supermarket. This is especially important for fruits which are shipped in from abroad. Traditionally, fruit may have been dried in order to preserve it. This method was commonly used with plums to make prunes. It was used with grapes to make raisins and apricots to make dried apricots. I guess the guy drying the apricots wasn't quite as imaginative as the others.
No.
No.
Clearly not. I mean, apricots, they're lovely. They sell themselves.
They do.
Yeah.
Dried apricots. That's fine, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
But one of the more fun ancient methods of fruit preservation was the production of alcohol, such as wine from grapes, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, which would later lead on to other joys such as cider, which was made from apples, and perry, which was made from pears, and mead, which was made from honey, and probably the most important of all is whiskey, which was made from barley.
I think if we could ferment piss and drink it, we would.
We would.
We're very inventive in the way we create alcohol.
Yeah, we are very good at making alcohol. That and bastard fruits. But this is all well and good if you like prunes and raisins. But for those of us under the age of 80, it's not really a substitute for fresh fruit. It was later discovered that by heating soft fruits with sugar and pectin, you could create jams and preserves, which would store much longer than the unpreserved fruit. We're still sort of in grandma territory here. But it's quite a step up from prunes, at least. Though still not quite suitable for the fruit bowl. Unless those little miniature jams that you get at hotels. But yes, in the 19th century, canning was developed as a method of preserving food destined for the front lines of the Napoleonic Wars. This allowed many types of perishable food, including fruit, to be sealed in a can before being heat-treated to kill off any organisms which may cause it to perish prematurely. This discovery sparked a revolution in food storage as canneries popped up across Europe and North America. No longer was it necessary to eat only what was in season at the time. Now you could eat your Spam or your Fray Bentos pie whenever you wanted. With the space age came a new challenge, which was how we could bring food into space without it spoiling, while still keeping weight to a minimum. So obviously metal cans were too heavy and prunes were super gross, so we had to come up with a new solution, and that was freeze-drying.
That looks less impressive. Well, I suppose you can't really have a fruit bowl on a space station either because you have to sort of nail it down. You have to nail the fruits down.
You'd have a sort of net, wouldn't you, to hold on? But a freeze-dried fruit is, I would say that's a step up from a can of, tinned fruit cocktail.
Is it?
If you're going to display it.
At least you can stack cans.
You can stack cans. But yeah, no good when weight is an issue, though. So if you've ever wondered who to thank for that disgusting cup of instant coffee you forced down this morning, I guess you can turn to NASA. Finally, with the advent of containerized shipping, it became viable to transport and store fruit in its natural form, as God didn't intend, because
It is as natural as it's possible to call something that we've tampered with genetically for centuries.
Yeah, in as natural a form as possible, given the circumstances.
In the Katie Price form of natural.
The Katie Price form of natural, and they could be shipped pretty much anywhere in the world. Fruit can now be carefully stored in temperature-controlled containers, pumped full of inert gas, and sent on their merry way from the other side of the world to your local supermarket. So, the reason why every house and nation can have a bowl full of fruit in their house, regardless of their social status, is because of the commercialization of the fruit industry.
And globalization.
And globalization, and methods of transport and preservation, and also that it can all be shipped neatly to your local Tesco's, and you can go in and you can go and buy a pineapple and a kiwi and whatever else you're into. I don't know, a coconut.
And they're not that expensive. No. And when you look at how much work it takes to actually grow a pineapple, the mind boggles that you can buy it for so cheap.
And then you can take it home and put it in a bowl.
And forget about it and let it rot.
Yeah, and just stick it on the worktop. And go, I'll eat that later because I should really be eating fruit. But I also like biscuits. So
That's the one thing the pandemic that came out of it positive was the fact that everyone who had their bananas just sitting there rotting decided, I'm going to make some bread because someone on YouTube did it.
Yeah, it was a weird time.
But yes, the fruit bowl and its long and varied cultural history has at no time just simply been a functional product, but one that denotes status, your place in society, and sometimes even as a sculptural and artistic object. Early in antiquity, they were often the central pillar of some cultures. Like in Aztec cultures, you had massive fruit bowls. In Egypt, as we found out, when you buried pharaohs, they would leave massive fruit bowls to give them sustenance in the afterlife. Yeah. They were seen as offerings of spirituality and eternal afterlife.
I bet it smelled really nice though after a week.
But, surprisingly, one of the first depictions of fruit as a basket in art only came in about the end of the 16th century. So Caravaggio, I think you know who he is,
yes,
in 1596 painted a basket of fruit. And for the first time, people looked at it and went, oh, actually, that looks all right.
So it's just one of the first depictions we have of a bowl of fruit, as we would know.
Well, there are other cultures and societies that have painted bowls of fruit, but for a long time, art was just Jesus and Christianity and battles. And then Caravaggio came along and said, I think fruit's probably quite interesting.
If I was going to have a painting on my wall, I think I'd rather have fruit than a battle.
Yes, it's just interesting that one of the Kickstarters of the Renaissance painted a bowl of fruit, and then in 1846, William Henry Fox Talbot, who I think you know as well,
he was
a student of photography
pioneer. William Fox.
What did he photograph first?
He photographed a basket of fruit, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Yeah.
So you see that it has a sense of cultural significance.
But I remember doing photography A-level and being given these assignments, go off and do a collection of photos. And you would just wander around with your camera going, oh, there's a lamppost, I'll take a picture of that. There's a fruit bowl. There's a Ford Fiesta.
But doesn't that tell you the fact that he looked around his house and thought, the fruit bowl.
Yeah.
The fact the fruit bowl was a centerpiece on the table, not something we necessarily shout about. No one says, come and look at my fruit bowl anymore, but they used to.
Yeah.
So European royal families used massive, elaborate tabletop decorations, often with fruit bowls at the center to showcase the fact that I'm rich enough to import that bit of fruit or grow it in my garden. So between the 16th and 19th centuries, families would hire craftsmen to create these centerpieces. And they contained, sugar, flowers, fruits, massive things. And then gradually, this, as we said, as we keep saying, it filters down to the middle class. So by the Victorian era, the fruit bowl was a centerpiece of any dinner party. But it was one of those things you looked at, you didn't touch. You rarely ate it. Like, if you ate it, you probably have to pay an extortionate cost.
I mean, if you're reaching for the fruit bowl, it suggests that you're probably not being fed enough at this dinner party.
Exactly, yeah. And one of the interesting things I learned about pineapples is that they have often been seen as a symbol of prosperity. So different fruits had different statuses attached to them, but the pineapple was like the king of fruit, which is weird because now we stick it on pizzas.
It has got a little crown on it.
Exactly. Do you know there's a building in Scotland shaped like a pineapple because of the legacy of trying to grow pineapples in Scotland because of how much of an art it was.
Right. It must look like SpongeBob SquarePants' house.
It does. It's really weird. It looks just like a pineapple.
Ah.
But it's made of stone. It's just like
Stone pineapple.
And having a pineapple at your dining table was still a very popular thing, even in the Victorian era. In fact, there was an anecdote from one commentator at the time who said that he could go to one dinner party at 6, see the pineapple, go to another at 9, and see the very same pineapple because you could rent them.
It's the same pineapple just being passed around all night.
And given the way the UK economy is going, shall we start a rent a pineapple business?
I think we should. We have to get one of those polytunnels.
We would. But yeah, as I said, you could grow them in Scotland. Like the first pineapple propagation in Scotland is attributed to a man called James Justice. Funny name. In 1728. But coming back to the fruit bowl. So, in the Victorian era, it was this massive decorative status symbol. And do you know, it still kind of is to a degree. Like, if you look at modern day society, you go to a party, what do you have in the centre of the table usually? If you go to most homes, they'll have a fruit bowl on the table.
Yes. It's pretty common.
Become a decorative centerpiece of everyone's
Yeah.
stuff. But however, you will also find it on the kitchen counter now as well.
Yeah.
Some people will have multiple fruit bowls.
It's a bit like the inspiring quotes written on the kitchen wall. Is nobody really chose for it to be a thing, but it just appeared in everyone's houses around the same time.
We take fruit for granted, I think.
It used to traditionally be on top of the TV.
Did it?
From what I remember.
But specifically anecdotally.
But it's quite hard to balance them on top of a flat screen, isn't it?
Yeah. But there's also a very good reason for why we put things in fruit bowls and we don't refrigerate everything. Because it actually lasts longer if you put it in a fruit bowl than it does if you stick it in the fridge. Yeah.
There's certain things, isn't it? You put certain fruits together and they sort of, one will help ripen the other. I forget what the fruits are now. Something with bananas, I think. The vegetable drawer in the fridge is a bit of a con, really. It's where fruit goes to wither.
Well, it's called the vegetable drawer. Not the fruit.
Fruit
drawer. You just shot yourself in the foot.
If I've taken anything from this, is there's a lot of ambiguity.
Is there now?
So I can put my celery in there, but not my tomatoes.
You can put whatever you want in there. It's your vegetable crisper.
I put the cheese in there.
Right. To wrap this up, let's do a whirlwind tour of the fruits we have today. We've touched upon a few already. We've touched on bananas, which are quite interesting.
We have touched on bananas.
But what would you say if you could pick one fruit to represent the symbol of all other fruits?
Yeah.
If you were meeting an alien and you said, this is a fruit.
Yeah.
What fruit would you pick?
One single fruit.
One single fruit.
Well, it'd be the apple, wouldn't it?
You're absolutely right.
It'd be the apple. And, it'd be easy, wouldn't it? You just show them the back of your phone.
Well, unless you've got an Android.
Yes,
that you kind of ruin that one there. Yeah. But yes, never has there been a fruit so represented as to what a fruit is, whether you can point to one specific fruit and go, that represents every one of them. And that is the apple. They've been written into myths, they've been written into legends, poetry, painted in pictures, snapped in photographs, made into multi-billion-dollar technological company symbols, as we've just mentioned. The apple is as much a symbol as it is a fruit.
The word apple actually comes from a Proto-Germanic word, which is believed to mean fruit. So,
wow, what would you know?
In fact, as late as the 17th century, the word apple was actually still being used as a general term for most types of fruit, leading to a bizarre yet entirely legitimate term, which translates to an apple of bananas. Obviously, that would have been said in the old English, but it's a bit like those strange people who refer to all fizzy drinks as Coke.
Yeah, but it has that same sort of cultural impact and significance to warrant that.
Yeah.
So, but you never go into a shop and say, "I want some bananas, please," or "Apple's okay."
Yeah.
No one ever says that back to you.
No.
Unless you're in Iceland, because they can't grow anything.
No, you just go, fruit. What have you got?
Give me anything. You
just
need some vitamin C.
Some frozen raspberries or something. Apples were later introduced to North America by European colonists, where they were promptly adopted and claimed for America. I don't care what anyone says. The phrase "as American as apple pie" is wrong on so many levels.
It is, because DNA analysis indicates that apples originated in the mountains of Kazakhstan. I'm pretty sure that most Americans couldn't find that on the map. The humble apple, refreshing, crunchy, and comes in many, many colours. Although if it's not red or green, we tend to ignore it. Anything else is a bit weird.
It is weird. Yeah.
It's probably the most popular fruit in the world. No one can be absolutely sure of these statistics. Though they weren't always so sweet and crispy and refreshing. In fact, they used to be incredibly sour and tart and tiny.
Like a crab apple.
Exactly like a crab apple, yes. Of course, by the 16th century, after all these classical grafting techniques we used, we created all these delicious varieties we have. And the apple nearly didn't get the start in its life it deserved, because aside from being labelled the forbidden fruit, it appeared in Western Europe by the 12th century, which is when that sort of attachment came around that story. And some researchers suggest it got a bad rap from an unfortunate Latin phrase, because malus in Latin means both apple and evil. Oh. So you can see why the Christians put two and two together.
Yeah, okay, I can see why, yeah. But the apple has really embedded itself into modern society. Everywhere it's been transported to, it seems to have been sort of embraced.
And it's quite a hardy fruit in some respects, which is why it's cultivated all across the world, really.
I mean, the area where you and I grew up, they used to do a yearly apple fair. I don't know if you remember this.
Oh, yes. And also a garlic farm.
And there was a garlic fair, yeah.
Although we know only a few varieties of apples, apples are basically a victim of their own genetic variety. So it's called, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, to botanists it's called extreme heterozygosity.
Right.
Which essentially means that when an apple falls from a tree and, plants its seeds, it won't be anything like its parent. So
the old saying of an apple doesn't fall far from the tree is probably not the best fruit to pick for that.
Is complete bollocks.
Yeah. It may not fall far from the tree, but it'll be genetically
completely different. Yeah. That's absolutely, you nailed that one. Yeah. And the way we get the apples we have today is from the grafting technique we talked about. So we have to be very, very, very careful, and because we can't just let apples grow, because they'll be completely different from each other. You'll get different varieties and different flavours, which is incredible, because we could have endless different numbers of apples we could be tasting all the time, but no one actually thinks that's a good idea.
So if you want an orchard full of Gala apples, you can't just collect a few seeds from your trees and plant them. You have to actually
sort of graft.
It's a bit like the vineyards in France, isn't it? I'm not quite sure if it's the same thing with grapes, but I know when you want to have a new grape plant, not a wine plant, you generally graft it from another.
But yes, so many of the varieties of apples we have today were cultivated in the Victorian era, when they started to separate them out from cooking apples and eating apples, because as we said, fruit was largely used as a cooking ingredient rather than consumed as a thing. And so one of the most famous is obviously the Richard Cox apple, the Coxes.
Yes.
I'm sure you had many a Cox.
Yes, yes.
Created in 1830 and named it after himself out of hubris.
As you would.
Yeah. As transport, we mentioned, developed, this became quite a dominant apple. It's one of the most popular apples out there. Yeah. And if you could call any fruit the true fruit of everyone, it would be the apple. Like, it's enjoyed by the wealthiest to the poorest.
Yeah. It transcends social class, wealth, status.
But yes, moving from the humble apple, we move to the ostentatious orange.
Yes. So what we know today as an orange is actually the result of crossing a mandarin with a fruit called a pomelo. So the pomelo is the ancient ancestor of the grapefruit, which I thought was a bit interesting. I kind of don't really... I suppose they are quite similar, aren't they, oranges and grapefruits? But you eat them in very different ways. You'd never split open an orange and have it for breakfast.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of citrus fruits. I could go on, because there are thousands and thousands. But all citrus fruits, as you said, are thought to descend from a couple of species, one of which you've mentioned, the pomelo. And then there's the citron, and then the mandarin orange.
The citron?
Yes.
Isn't that a line of cars?
No, it's also a fruit.
Any relation?
No.
Good. Okay.
The many varieties we have today are from centuries of hydration, cross-pollination, and good old-fashioned breeding. And it's such a convoluted history. We don't actually know the true origins of certain different types of fruits, like the bergamot, the tangerine, and things like that. And lemons and limes. We think limes come from lemons, and we think lemons come from oranges. We think. Like, they're not... And some of this is from natural pollination. So unlike the apple, which is notoriously, the rebel of the fruit world, or the pliant banana, the oranges tend to sort of love each other and cross-pollinate quite well and grow into different things. So the orange, to a degree, might not be the same extent of tampering as, say, what we've done with the banana.
The orange is a strange plant, really. Well, it's a strange fruit when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And do you know what the two most widely grown types of orange there are today that you would probably have in your fruit bowl?
I don't really like oranges, so I probably wouldn't. But satsumas?
Well, they're a type descended from one of these two types. Yeah.
Are they?
The two most widely grown
Yeah.
are the Seville,
That's the one you make marmalade with.
which is quite sour and a bit bitter.
Yeah.
It's not particularly nice. And then there's the sweet orange,
The sweet orange.
which is where we get all the nice tangerines and bergamots and things from.
Ah.
And guess which is more popular?
Well, in my house, it would be the marmalade one. But I'm assuming you're going to say the sweet orange.
I'm going to say the sweet orange. You buck the trend. Do you make a lot of marmalade?
I do like a bit of marmalade, yeah.
Of course you do. The Seville orange, weirdly called the Seville orange, or the Portuguese orange, is actually from the slopes of the Himalayas.
Right. Seville in Nepal, is it?
No. It's just because they were introduced to Europe by the Moors.
Oh, the Moors.
Moors.
Okay, so via Iberia.
Yeah, so during the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, they gradually transplanted this species. What's curious, though, is we didn't really refer to orange in the way... Because we know orange today as a fruit and a colour.
Yeah.
But before the 16th century, orange as a word didn't really exist for colour. You just called it yellowy red.
Yellowy red.
And the orange fruit itself, the word appears a bit earlier in English, around the 13th century, but it was mainly called naranja, which is the sort of...
That's like the Spanish word for orange.
It is, which itself comes from Sanskrit.
Oh.
And it passed through many, many languages until it finally entered as a colour and a fruit in the 1540s, which is even more odd because then you've got the House of Orange in the Netherlands, which has nothing to do with the colour or the fruit.
Oh, it doesn't?
No.
I thought it's because of...
No.
No. Okay, good.
And just to add to one thing, oranges are orange because of the climates we grow them in. So if you grow them in particularly hot climates, they don't turn orange.
What colour do they turn?
So they ripen, but only in cool climates. So if you grow them in, say, like the West Indies, they stay green. And they are green. They're orange on the inside, but they're green on the outside.
Ah. Are they still taste nice?
Yeah, they taste lovely. And it's funny, if they ripen, they can actually unripen again. You can leave them on the tree for longer, and they'll go orange in the cool climate, and then turn back to green.
Ah.
It's very peculiar.
That is peculiar.
The next fruit on our whirlwind tour is one equally as popular in culture and society, except if you're the Doctor from Doctor Who famously hates them.
You've lost me there.
It's pears.
He doesn't like
It
pears.
says never eat pears. So pears originated in southeastern Europe and were a favourite food of the Greeks and the Romans, who spread them around. It's mainly the Romans that spread around a lot of fruit when it arrived. The first mention of a pear is found in Homer's epic poem. Do you know what that epic poem was?
The Odyssey.
Yes!
Yeah.
Confirming that the pear was in fact cultivated in Greece as early as 3,000 years ago. So it's, all of our fruits today do have a long and proud history.
Yeah.
The early Romans, as we said, introduced this to Britain. They developed over 50 varieties of pear, though we don't really have as many variety today. Pears have a long history in being quite an important religious fruit. So apparently they were Isis's favourite fruit in Egyptian mythology. Christ apparently has a great love of... he does have a great love of grapes, but he has a great love of pears as well.
Oh, okay.
In China, it's a symbol of justice, purity, wisdom, and tastiness.
Right.
In Korea, nobility and purity. And that's the pear. A very whirlwind trip around the pear.
Very nice. The pear is kind of sadly eclipsed by the other members of the fruit bowl, though, I think.
It is.
It's never anyone's first choice.
And we've touched upon bananas, actually, already.
We have touched upon bananas.
So we don't need to say that. Actually, but one thing I'll point out, the interesting thing about banana, other than obviously the many interesting things we've said, is that the actual parent tree it comes from isn't a tree. It's actually a herb and the fruit itself is a berry.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Ah.
And it originated in Southeast Asia, as a lot of these things do, apparently, and has now sort of dominated the world. It's grown in South America, it's grown in the West Indies, it's grown in Europe. Now, we're going to go on to something which is found in our fruit bowls, but strangely, out of the three main uses it has, being in a fruit bowl is the lowest use of it.
Right.
The first one is making an alcoholic beverage.
Yes.
And the second is is sort of shrinking it, drying it out to make another sort of snack.
Ah. Prunes.
I think you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, cashews.
Delicious cashew wine. Oh, yes. That nutty kick you all need. No, we're talking about grapes.
Grapes, yes.
Grapes, you plum.
No, I think you do get a plum in a fruit bowl, don't you, sometimes?
You get plum wine, which is quite nice.
Quite
Anyway,
nice.
Grapes. What can you tell me about grapes?
What can I tell you about grapes? Grapes are one of the most ancient cultivated fruit that we know of. They're one of the earliest examples that we have evidence of being actually grown for the fruit that they produce. And they've been used to make wine for a very long time.
As you're right, it's been around since at least 6,500 BC, during the Neolithic era, which is way back. And by 4,000 BC, grape growing extended from the Caucasus in Eastern Europe, your places like Georgia, things like that, all the way to Asia and the Nile Delta. And then from there, it moved into the Mediterranean, America, etc.
I mean, grapes, by way of wine, are one of the most influential fruits, I would say, of all human history.
Yes, I can't think of another fruit that is both eaten a lot and drunk a lot as much as grapes.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you can make wine from, quite a lot of fruits. Basically, any soft fruit that's got a good sugar content can be turned into wine.
It's because they're all basically sugar. They're fermentation processes. Yeah. It's quite good.
But wine is grape wine is the one that we refer to as simply wine. That's obviously the big player here.
And it has a long cultural legacy. Greeks, Romans loved wine. Obviously, the Babylonians and before them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Jesus, famous for turning water into wine. He was that mad for it.
Yeah. He's a good guy to have at a party.
He's the best person to have at a party, unless you've got a massive Tesco's or a discount, winemakers by the corner.
Was it just wine? Could he do water into Heineken?
I mean, you could ask him. Compared to apples and oranges and bananas, which have entered the fruit bowl just sort of naturally, when did we first see table grapes?
Table grapes?
When did the grapes actually make their debut in the fruit bowl?
Now, there is that sort of image, isn't there, of ancient Rome, of, people sort of lying down and being fed grapes by hand. But whether that's a modern creation, I'm not sure. You
may be right. Because as far as we know, the first table grape was introduced by a Frenchman.
Yeah.
And that was King Francois I in the 1500s. And he was the source of their popularity rise. He was known for his fondness of eating grapes as a dessert during his reign.
So did he breed a certain type of sweet grape that could be eaten?
No, he just bought grapes.
He just ate grapes.
Yeah, just ate grapes.
Yeah.
It's funny, because we think of grapes as seedless. But they weren't always seedless. Like olives. We've bred that into them.
Right.
Yeah. So seedless grapes are much easier to eat, but they've lost a lot of the health benefits that we have associated with grapes because we've tampered with them. So William Thomas, who was a Scottish immigrant turned Californian grape grower, imported a variety of grapes from what we now call Iran/Turkey over to his vineyards in California. And in 1876, he created the first 50-pound crop of thin-skinned, sweet, seedless grapes.
Right.
So by 1920, the seedless grapes was the first commercialized grape, and it is the most planted grape in California today.
Is it? Because that's what the market demands. A thin-skinned, seedless grape.
Yeah. No one likes the seed.
Have you noticed that in some parts of the world, grape juice is very popular, but it never really seems to have taken off in the UK?
It's because we just want the wine. I mean, why would you have grape juice when you have wine?
It does feel like a waste of time.
Yeah.
Just, Here's some barley. Well, I'd rather have some beer.
Mm. But as we mentioned, like table grapes is the least common use. Is wine. Wine is the most dominant use of grapes, and that all stems from obviously it started out in monasteries, and then developed further into society because obviously Jesus wine. They needed to grow some grapes, obviously for communion. No other possible reasons.
No.
There are actually North American grapes.
North American? What, native North American grapes?
But they're acidic, lower in sugar and hardier, and they make terrible wine.
Right.
So the much superior European grape.
Yeah.
It's better. And what they did actually is they tended to graft European grapes onto North American grapes to try and get a better, sweeter wine.
Right. There's actually, with the rise of climate change, it's actually predicted that Britain will one day have a viable wine industry.
We do. We have it in Sussex.
Yes, but I mean, like, as southern Europe becomes too hot to grow the grapes, and the grape growing window will shift north, Britain will have an opportunity to have a bit of that wine action. So I think we've probably covered all your main staples of the fruit bowl there. But as with anything, the fruit bowl is constantly evolving, and occasionally we find newcomers start to appear. And one of those is the fruit of the moment, as of recording, the avocado. Though for some reason we tend to stick them in the fridge. They can sit, and they do, perfectly well in a fruit bowl, especially if you like to give that little sense of middle-classness. And
Yes. We are very middle class with our avocado fruit bowls.
Very middle, yes, and our...
Sometimes you get fruit bowls shaped like an avocado as well. So you can have an avocado in an avocado.
And obviously you buy the fruit bowl from John Lewis for the extra.
Of course.
Yes.
The avocado of the retail world.
Yes. But we're talking about it like having your avocado in your fruit bowl is a strange thing to do. It's actually recommended to keep it out in the open rather than locking it away in the fridge. Though it does have a reputation for middle classness. So when Mumsnet asked its readers what made them feel middle class, the response was having avocados in the fridge. I'm going to say the fridge bit is probably just the Mumsnet element.
Yeah, I mean, mums tend to stick most things in the fridge.
Mumsnet is a scary place.
Yeah, it's like a bit of a wild west of the internet,
which
is ironic because it's supposed to be a haven. Yes,
I'm not even a mum. Maybe that's why I don't understand.
I don't think you'll ever be a mum, if I'm being completely honest with you there, Will.
You're,
Sorry to shatter that dream.
You're telling the difficult truths here.
The avocado which we're most familiar with is called the Hass. It's dark green, nubby, and is cultivated in California. Avocados themselves, they're one of the few fruits to have an injury named after them. Just coming off that middle class thing you were talking about, especially a lot of middle class people were reporting that they were getting something called avocado finger, which is where you try and take out the stone of an avocado with a use a spoon, people, but they were using a knife and then slipping and stabbing themselves. Yeah,
just use a spoon, just whip it in, comes out.
I know.
I think it's because when you see chefs doing it, they always do that thing that they just have the big knife and they whack it in the stone and it comes out.
Again, middle class, just watching chef shows,
but
putting
the chef
them in the
is never
fridge.
holding the avocado while they're doing it.
But they're not actually new. We've known about them since the days of the potato, when William Dampier wrote a glowing reference about their smooth and buttery taste, adding that it was also thought to provoke lust in people because it was so creamy.
Because which creaminess equals lust.
Exactly, yeah. But he also said the Spanish liked them, which is also why they were lustful.
Were they quite lusty then?
Yeah, they were, yeah. Europeans, always lusty.
Always eating those
creamy
fruits.
Compared to the repressed, cold English person with their apples and pear pies. Oh, Dampier, you old racist. However, the original Aztec name did actually mean testicle, so maybe he was onto something there.
Maybe he was, yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, you look at them.
I guess. They are green, though.
Are yours not green?
Have
yours not ripened?
I cannot confirm. I also cannot confirm.
Mine are like oranges. They turn orange, then green, and then... never mind. But it never...
Depends how cold it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it never really took off in Europe, even when transportation and growing methods improved. And that's partially because it was seen as a South American fruit. And this is probably because of racism, but also snobbery.
Where did they think? I mean, all these other tropical fruits that they were displaying to their friends, though, were they from more palatable parts of the world?
Yeah, they were like the Mediterranean, Asia and stuff.
Oh, that
So-
was okay. So South,
Yeah. South America was not a particularly popular place. So as we mentioned, the most popular one is Hass, invented by Rudolf Hass. Guess where he was from? He accidentally created a Mexican-Guatemalan hybrid, which didn't take off in Britain until the 60s, the 1960s.
Oh.
And when it was introduced, it very nearly died out because it kept being paired with a prawn cocktail, and everyone thought that's too 70s, so they stopped eating them.
Ah, right. It's a victim of its own success.
Yeah. But it was saved thanks to the Californian Avocado Commission, which sounds like an indie alternative band.
Yeah.
And they did it by promoting its healthiness and, finger quotes, Mediterranean-style tastiness, completely ignoring the fact it's Mexican.
Right.
And did everything they possibly could to hide the fact from Europeans it was Mexican.
Is it really that unfashionable to be?
Yes, we're all racists. We're all very, very big racists.
But we're more racist about certain cultures than others.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that not obvious by now?
Well, it'd be nice to be consistent.
What, consistently racist?
Consistently racist, but to different degrees.
Have you
depending
met
on...
humans? However, like many fruits before it, it's now on that same genetic cul-de-sac that bananas and possibly apples find themselves on, because we're down to one independent genetic strain, this Hass strain, and because we are now wanting more and more and more of it, you go to every trendy coffee cafe these days. What do they have? Avocado and toast. The demand is outstripping supply, and so we're having to sort of clone more and more and more and more to keep up, and it's heading down the banana route, I'm afraid. But anyway, that's enough about creamy avocados. I think we've covered most of the fruit that enter our bowls. So we've sort of lovingly looked at the different origins of fruits that find our fruit bowl, but the fruit bowl itself is such a ingrained part of culture. It is sort of difficult to trace its origins, but as a very broad sense, it's a spiritual thing, it's an ornamental thing, it's a practical thing. It encompasses so many things in culture.
Yeah, so I mean, in the 21st century, the concept of the fruit bowl has taken on an identity of I suppose, mundane domesticity. Fruit has become so easily and widely available that it no longer holds the prestige that it used to have. It's become an everyday item that basically anybody of any class, any social standing is able to acquire, stick in a bowl, and just have in their house. I mean, when was the last time you found yourself impressed by a watermelon or a bag of satsumas?
That's a very good point. I'm trying to think of an exotic fruit.
If you went to somebody's party and they had a watermelon on display, would you be like, that's a nice watermelon?
Well, funny you say that, actually. Do you know what a quince is?
It's a little orange fruit, isn't it?
It's not orange, but it's sort of similar-esque, yeah. And they were very popular. We used to make quince jam in the UK, and then they fell out of favour because we were importing all these other nicer fruits like bananas and stuff. Because quince is really only nice when you turn it into jam or you use it for something. And now it's gradually coming back. But everyone, you ask people what quince is, and what? Is that foreign?
Quince. I mean, the only time I ever hear quince mentioned is when you watch things like those sort of fancy cooking shows. And they'll do a quince jus or something, or or they'll have a little quince as a sort of decoration.
Exactly,
Sometimes,
they're fashionable again.
Yeah, when you go for fancy dinners and you have your pudding and it's got the little orange fruit on it, and you're like, do I eat the little orange fruit, or is that just decoration? Or I think it's become something like that.
Exactly, yeah. It's become a sort of fashionable, gentrified, middle class, upper class thing again. And it was made by the poorest of society into jams for centuries before it died out in the 20th century.
I mean, do you think we're going to see a revival of things like the hawthorn or the elderberry, or
possibly? These things work in cycles, and it also works because people just get bored of eating the same thing and they want a bit of variety.
Yeah.
But yes, fruit baskets. So you could say the fruit bowls started out as fruit baskets, and they're just they're easy to carry. You can put fruit in a basket, and we've been doing it as for centuries because they're a ready available source of tastiness.
Yeah. So, I mean, in spite of advancements in preservation and changing attitudes with regard to diet, the bowl of fruit has maintained its position in the Western home. And while it may no longer have pride of place on top of the TV, for mainly practical reasons,
Or the table.
or the
Like
table,
a normal family.
it still maintains a respectable spot on the table or the kitchen worktop or on top of the fridge. I don't know.
And while it's important to note that I guess the fruit bowl is a constant in society, it's a reflection of society as it grows and evolves, and a representation of different cultures throughout the period.
So, Nick, what during your research for this episode, what was something that stuck out to you as particularly interesting, or something which was unexpected?
Fruit is a very vast and interesting topic, but I think the thing that sticks out for me is that for the best part of 900 years, at least in Britain, we enjoyed a fruit called the medlar, which we no longer enjoy, which translates is basically referred to as the open arse fruit because of how it looked.
Beginning to see why this fell out of favour.
The medlar was also referred to abroad unflatteringly as the monkey's bottom, dog's bottom, donkey. You get the picture. There's lots of different bottoms.
Some form of bottom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yet we love this fruit in Europe. Not just the UK, Europe did. Everyone was crazy about it. It was a staple of monasteries, royal courtyards, even public spaces and village greens. It was widely grown across England in the 1600s. But then it declined rapidly. The interesting thing about it is if you eat it raw, you are violently sick, further enforcing the four humours notion we were talking about it.
Right.
If you let it go rotten, it's like crack. And then in the 50s, it vanished. I mean, I blame the ascent of the Queen.
Very coincidental.
It's also when the banana, the nice gross Michael banana died out. However, this is most likely because we developed canning and preserving fruits and transportation, and you harvest these things in December, and no one wants to go outside in December in the cold picking fruit.
Though a fruit which was available in December must have been quite a rarity.
Yeah, but in order to actually, you couldn't just eat them rotten, actually, to be fair. You had to then put them in a crate of sawdust or straw and forget about them for several weeks until they go hard and dark. And it becomes almost like a baked apple, which becomes ultra sweet. So, yeah. And it was said to have a history of treating illnesses like diarrhea, which ironically it caused if you ate it raw. And in the 17th century was thought to aid a woman when her course of flow was too abundant.
Oh, well, that is useful.
But it's largely forgotten now. Anyway, what was yours?
Mine is actually very relevant. So as I don't know if we've mentioned this, but we actually record this in the basement beneath a flooring retailer. And one of the products which is sold upstairs, I am told, is coir matting.
I hope you know you work for them.
Yes. Coir matting, which you may know as doormat. And that is made from a material called coir, which is actually derived from coconut husks. And the coconut is a...
Mineral?
No.
Vegetable?
No.
Animal?
No.
Fruit?
It's a fruit.
Oh, no, really?
Yes.
Oh.
We have found the Holy Grail. We have found that link between a fruit fact and a carpet fact.
We can stop here.
Yeah.
This is our last show, everyone. Goodbye.
The man upstairs will be very pleased with this.
I'm sure he will.
I don't mean God. I mean the man who runs the carpet shop.
That's what I assumed. Aren't they the same thing?
To us, yes.
Yeah. What I was going to say actually was, have you been slipping in carpet-based facts relevant to what we've been talking about previously?
I've been trying. It's very hard sometimes.
Right. Or bang my coconuts.
My coconut.
That's a fascinating fact right there.
Yeah. Stop squeezing my avocado.
Hands off my plums.
Yes, that's the one.
Yes.
So yes, that was our podcast on the the marvel that is the fruit bowl,
or more specifically, the fruit that goes into the bowl.
Yes, we didn't. Yes, not so much the bowl itself. Anyway, thank you for listening. We do hope you've enjoyed it. Please do remember to subscribe. We're available on all the usual podcast platforms. We're also on most social media channels, so please do feel free to get in touch. And all that's left, I think, is to leave you with the clue for the next episode.